Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was a Viking warlord blessed by the gods of battle? Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The wind that scoured the Yagi Isles had a name for every soul it touched. For the Jarls in their high halls, it was a song of power, a howl that echoed their own might. For the fishermen in their nars, it was a fickle mistress, a breath that could grant a full net, or a watery grave. For the warriors, it was a battle cry, the ghost of Odin's raven Hugin whispering of glory. For 15-year-old Isagrensen, the wind was simply cold. It whipped salty spray across his face as he sat hunched on the rocky overlook, the leather-bound journal in his lap protected by the curve of his body. Below, in the training circle of Grenvik, the village warriors clashed. The air rang with the percussive rhythm of steel on wood, the grunt of effort, and the heavy thud of a shield taking a blow. Isa's hand, smudged with charcoal, moved with a frantic precision, his eyes darting from the mock battle to the page. Bjorn's shield arm is too low. He scribbled, sketching a quick, crude figure. He overcommits on his downward swing, leaving his helm and shoulder exposed for a full second. A faster opponent could exploit this. Eric's footwork is solid, a wide base, but he puts too much weight on his lead foot. A well-aimed leg sweep would topple him. His journal was his shield, his charcoal stick his axe. In a world where a man's worth was measured by the breadth of his shoulders and the number of runes of blessing that marked his skin, Isa had neither. He was small for his age, with a mop of unruly dark green hair that seemed to defy the wind's authority, and a constellation of freckles across his cheeks that made him look younger still. His arms, thin and wiry, were bare of the swirling blue or glowing red markings that signified favor from the gods. He was a blank page in a saga of heroes. A shadow fell over his journal, large and absolute. A scent of wood smoke and ozone followed it. Still playing with your little drawings, Deku? Isa flinched, closing the book with a snap. He didn't need to look up to know who it was. The voice was like rocks grinding together, full of gravel and explosive potential. Katsuni Bakusen stood over him, a smirk plastered on his face. Katsuni was everything Isa was not. He was broad-shouldered, with a shock of spiky, ash-blonde hair. Even at 16, he moved with the predatory confidence of a seasoned warrior. But most telling were the faint, ember-like runes that occasionally pulsed with a dull orange light on his forearms. A blessing from some minor fire Jotun, it was said, one that gave his strikes an explosive, concussive force. It's not playing, Isa mumbled, clutching the journal to his chest. I'm studying tactics. Katsuni let out a sharp, barking laugh that drew the attention of the warriors below. Tactics? A useless twig like you? The only tactic you need to learn is how to get out of the way before you're trampled. What are you going to do? Bore a raider to death with your scribbles? He snatched the journal from Isa's grasp before the smaller boy could react. Isa cried out, scrambling to his feet. Give it back, Katsuni! Katsuni held it high, his grin widening. Let's see what the great strategist has planned for us. He flipped it open, his eyes scanning the detailed notes and drawings. His amusement curdled into a sneer. Alma Tiger's charge? The shield wall of Jarl Tashin. You spend all your time studying dead men and old legends. Why don't you try picking up a real sword? I'm not strong enough, Isa said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. It was the truth that had haunted his every waking moment. He had tried. He had spent countless hours with the training swords, his arms aching, his body screaming in protest, only to be disarmed in seconds by boys half his age. Exactly, Katsuni snarled, shoving the journal hard into Isa's chest, making him stumble back. You're runeless. Godless. You have no strength. You're a Deku, a useless thing. You can't do anything, remember that. He turned and swaggered back toward the training circle, leaving Isa standing alone on the overlook, the cold wind feeling colder than ever. He clutched his book, the sharp corners digging into his palms. Katsuni was right. In this world, a world of ice and blood, of gods who answered the prayers of the mighty, what good was a sharp mind in a weak body? He retreated to the one place he ever felt truly safe, his home. Their longhouse was small, nestled at the edge of the village, but his mother, Inca, had made it warm. The scent of stew and burning peat filled the air. She was a kind woman with the same dark green hair as her son, though hers was tied back in a neat braid. Her face, etched with the worries of a coastal life, broke into a soft smile when he entered. "Aizu, you're back early. Did the training inspire you?" she asked, stirring a large iron pot over the central fire pit. He couldn't meet her eyes, instead placing his journal on a small wooden table. "Something like that." She saw through him instantly. She always did. Wiping her hands on her apron, she came over and placed a warm hand on his cheek. "Was it Katsuni again?" He nodded, a lump forming in his throat. Inka sighed, her thumb gently stroking his cheek. "His father is a jarl of a powerful clan. He was born with a blessing and a birthright. You were born with a different kind of strength, my son." She tapped his forehead gently. "The strength in here is sharper than any axe. One day, others will see it." "But what if they don't?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "What if he's right? What good is thinking about a shield wall when you can't even lift the shield?" He held up his bare arms. "The gods haven't marked me, mother. They don't see me, they see you," she insisted, her voice fierce with a mother's conviction. "They just have a different path for you. Your father, he wasn't the strongest man in the village, but he was the cleverest sailor. He could read the stars and the currents like a skald reads runes. He saved his crew more times with his mind than with a blade. You have his heart, Aizu. And that is a strength all its own." Her words were a balm, but they couldn't entirely heal the wound. He wanted to believe her. Desperately. But as dusk settled, painting the fjord in shades of bruised purple and gray, the hollowness in his chest remained. He ate his stew in silence, the distant shouts from the long hall a reminder of a world of camaraderie and strength he couldn't join. He was an observer, a chronicler of deeds he could never perform. He was in his small sleeping alcove, sketching a new defensive formation from memory, when the sound came. It was a single, mournful blast from a horn, echoing from the watchtower on the cliff's edge. It was the sound of dread given voice. Another blast followed, more urgent this time, then a third, frantic and sharp. Raiders. The word was a shock of ice water. The entire village erupted. The cheerful noise from the long hall died, replaced by the frantic shouting of men and the terrified cries of children. Aizu's blood ran cold. He scrambled from his alcove. His mother was already by the door, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. "Stay here, Aizu," she commanded, grabbing a small hand axe from its peg by the door, more a tool for chopping wood than a weapon. "Mother, no! I will bar the door. Don't make a sound." He could hear them now. The war cries were not the disciplined shouts of the village warriors. They were guttural, inhuman howls. He peeked through a crack in the wooden door and saw them. A single longship, long and black like a sea serpent, was beached on their shore. At its prow was a terrifying figurehead, a gaping, fanged maw, carved from dark, waterlogged oak. The huskers of the maw, slavers and butchers, whispered about in terrified tales around winter fires. They fell upon Grenvik like wolves on a flock. They were huge men, clad in black iron and cruel-looking furs. They fought not with the measured skill of the village guard, but with a berserker's frenzy. Bjorn, the warrior whose low shield Aizu had noted, was cut down by a blow that came from above, just as he'd predicted. Eric's legs were swept out from under him, and he was swarmed before he could recover. The village warriors, brave and strong, were simply overwhelmed. They were outnumbered and outmatched in sheer savagery. Aizu watched in horror, his mind cataloging the slaughter with a terrible, analytical clarity he couldn't shut off. They weren't a coordinated force, they were a tidal wave of violence, and his home was being torn apart. The sounds of battle drew closer. A scream from next door was cut short. Then came a heavy, splintering crash against their own door. Aizu's mother gasped, stumbling back as the thick wood groaned. Another crash, and the bar splintered. A third, and the door burst inward. A figure filled the doorway, silhouetted against the fires that had begun to spring up around the village. He was massive, a head taller than any man Aizu had ever seen, his face a mask of scarred flesh and matted beard. A jagged helm with cruel, forward-swept horns sat on his head. He held a double-bladed axe that seemed impossibly large, its edges stained with fresh blood. He was the leader. His eyes, cold and dead as a winter sea, scanned the small home and landed on Inca. A slow, predatory grin spread across his lips. "A fine prize," he grunted, his voice a low rumble. Inca stood between the raider and her son, holding the small hand axe with trembling hands. "Get back!" she warned, her voice a fragile shield against his monstrous presence. The raider laughed, a horrid, gurgling sound. He took a step forward, raising his colossal axe. Time seemed to warp, stretching and thinning. In that moment, everything Isa had ever been, the weakling, the scholar, the coward, crumbled to dust. The sight of his mother, so fierce and so fragile, standing against this behemoth, shattered something deep inside him. His carefully constructed world of notes and observations became meaningless in the face of this raw, immediate threat. He didn't think. He acted. He scrambled past his mother, placing himself in front of her. He was so small, a sapling before a storm-felled oak. The raider paused, his grin widening in cruel amusement at the sight of the boy shielding his mother. "Look at this!" the brute chuckled. "A little whelp thinks he can play warrior." Isa's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. His legs trembled. He had no weapon, no strength, no blessing. All he had was a single, overwhelming, all-consuming need. It wasn't a desire for glory. It wasn't a thirst for vengeance. It was a pure, desperate plea that rose from the very bedrock of his soul. He squeezed his eyes shut and screamed. Not a scream of terror, but a scream of prayer, directed at the smoke-filled sky, at the indifferent gods he had long believed had forsaken him. "Please!" The prayer tore from his throat, silent but deafening in his mind. "Anyone! Odin the All-Father! Thor the Thunderer! Tyr of the Unbreakable Will! I don't ask for strength to kill! I don't want glory or sagas sung in my name! I just want the power to save them. The strength to protect. Please! Give me the power to save everyone." It was the prayer of the unworthy, the selfless plea of a boy who had nothing, asking not for himself, but for everyone else. And for the first time, the heavens answered. The world went silent. The roar of the fires, the screams of the dying, the raider's cruel laughter, it all faded into a dull hum. A light, brilliant and green as the first leaves of spring, descended from the heavens, piercing through the smoke-choked roof of the longhouse. It was not a gentle light, it was a physical force, a column of divine energy that slammed into Izu. An unimaginable sensation tore through him. It was not pain, but it was not pleasant. It was the feeling of being hollowed out and reforged all at once. An agony of becoming. He felt a searing heat race across his arms, his back, his legs. He looked down and saw them, runes, swirling, intricate patterns of emerald light were burning themselves into his skin, etching a new destiny onto his flesh. He felt power flood into him, a current so immense it threatened to tear his small frame apart. It was Thor's Megan, the strength of the earth and the storm, coursing through his veins, making his muscles swell and harden. His mind, once clouded with terror, became preternaturally clear. He could see every detail of the room with impossible clarity. The way the raider's weight was balanced, the subtle shift of his grip on the axe, the flicker of surprise in his cold eyes. It was Odin's insight, the battle wisdom of the All-Father, gifting him a tactical knowledge he had only ever read about. And deep within his chest, where a bird heart had fluttered in fear, a lion's heart now roared. The trembling in his legs ceased, replaced by an unshakable resolve. It was Tyr's will, the courage that knows no defeat. The Einherjar's vow had been bestowed. The entire event took less than a second. To the raider, it was a disorienting flash of green light. One moment, he was looking at a terrified whelp. The next, the boy stood taller, his eyes blazing with an emerald fire, his body wreathed in a faint, crackling aura of green energy. The raider shook his head, dismissing it as a trick of the firelight. He roared and brought his massive axe down in an arc meant to cleave the boy and his mother in two. Isa moved. He didn't know how. His body responded to an instinct that was suddenly as natural as breathing. He didn't try to dodge. He didn't try to block. He simply raised his right arm, the newly etched runes glowing brightly. His open palm met the haft of the descending axe. There was a sound like a mountain cracking in half. It was not the wet crunch of bone or the clang of steel on steel. It was a deafening boom. The thick, iron-banded wood of the axe handle didn't just stop, it exploded into 1,000 splinters. The twin axe heads, suddenly freed, spun through the air and embedded themselves in the ceiling beams. The raider stared, his jaw slack, at the splintered stump in his hands. He looked at the boy, whose arm hadn't even buckled. He looked into those blazing green eyes and, for the first time in his life of bloodshed and plunder, he felt a sliver of genuine fear. He bellowed in rage and disbelief, drawing a long, wicked-looking knife from his belt and lunging forward. He was fast for a man his size, the knife a blur aimed at Aizu's throat. But to Aizu, it was moving through thick honey. Odin's insight showed him the trajectory, the angle, the exact point where it would connect. He saw it all before it happened. He swayed his head to the left, the tip of the blade hissing past his ear, close enough to slice a lock of his hair. Without thinking, he balled his left hand into a fist that now contained the might of a thunderclap, and drove it into the raider's armored stomach. The impact was sickening. Aizu felt the man's iron plate crumple like parchment. He felt the ribs beneath it shatter. The giant of a man made a strangled, gurgling sound as the air was violently expelled from his lungs. His eyes bulged, and he was lifted off his feet by the sheer force of the blow. He flew backward, smashing through the rear wall of the longhouse in a shower of splintered wood and turf, and landed in a crumpled, unmoving heap in the muddy lane outside. Aizu stood panting, his small fist smoking with a faint green energy. The runes on his skin pulsed in time with his frantic heartbeat. He turned to his mother. She was staring at him, her hand over her mouth, her eyes filled with a mixture of terror, relief, and utter, soul-shaking awe. "Aizu!" she whispered, her voice trembling. "What?" He didn't have an answer. He didn't understand it himself. He only knew that she was safe. But the village was not. He stepped through the hole in the wall. The scene was a nightmare. Grenvik was burning. Raiders were dragging away screaming villagers, slaughtering those who resisted. He saw two of them cornering a family, their laughter echoing in the fiery night. Tears will surged within him. The fear was gone, burned away by a righteous fire. He let out a roar, not the reedy cry of a boy, but a full-throated battle cry that sounded like it came from the throat of a berserker of legend. It cut through the din of the raid, and heads, both villager and raider, turned toward the impossible sound. They saw him. The small, roomless boy, now wreathed in divine light, standing over the broken form of their chieftain. He charged. He moved like a bolt of green lightning. A raider swung a sword at him. Aizu caught the blade in his bare hand. The steel bent and warped in his grip before he tore it from the man's grasp and snapped it over his knee. He slammed his palm into the raider's chest, and the man flew 20 feet, crashing into a burning hut. Another came at him from behind. Aizu spun, ducking under the wild swing, his movements fluid and precise. He grabbed the man's arm, twisted, and threw him over his shoulder, sending him crashing into his comrade. He wasn't just fighting. He was a force of nature. He moved through the chaos with a singular purpose: save everyone. He disarmed, he shattered, he disabled. He used Odin's insight to deflect blows aimed at cowering villagers, and Thor's Megan to break the raiders' weapons and their will. He moved with a grace he had never possessed, an intuitive understanding of combat that his journals had only ever theorized about. The remaining huskers of the Maw, these hardened killers who feared neither man nor beast, faltered. They had seen their invincible leader broken by a child. They had seen their steel weapons shattered like glass. This wasn't a battle. It was divine retribution. The boy wasn't a warrior. He was an avatar of a vengeful god. Panic broke their ranks. With terrified shouts, they dropped their loot and their captives and fled, scrambling back toward their longship. They threw themselves aboard, pushing off from the shore with a frantic energy, desperate to escape the green-eyed demon that had single-handedly destroyed them. As the longship of the Maw disappeared into the darkness of the fjord, the energy that had sustained Aizu vanished as suddenly as it had arrived. The divine power receded, leaving a screaming void in its place. The strength of Thor fled his limbs, leaving them feeling like lead. The clarity of Odin deserted his mind, replaced by a dizzying vertigo. The courage of Tyr evaporated, and the terror of the night came crashing back in. An agony unlike anything he had ever known ripped through him. Every muscle, every sinew, every bone felt like it had been torn apart and crudely stitched back together. The runes on his skin, no longer glowing, felt like brands of searing fire. He let out a weak cry and collapsed onto the muddy ground, his body giving out completely. The silence that descended upon Grenvik was heavy and profound, broken only by the crackle of flames and the sobbing of the survivors. The villagers began to emerge from their hiding places, their faces smudged with soot and streaked with tears. They stared at the devastation, at their fallen friends and family. Then they stared at him. Isa lay in the mud, gasping for breath, his body trembling uncontrollably. His mother was the first to reach him, falling to her knees and cradling his head in her lap, whispering his name over and over. The other villagers kept their distance. They formed a wide circle around the boy, their expressions a mixture of emotions Isa couldn't decipher. It wasn't gratitude, not yet. It was something deeper, something more complicated. It was all. It was confusion. And most of all, it was fear. They were looking at him the way one looks at a lightning strike, at a tidal wave, at an act of God. The boy they had known was gone. The weak, studious, runeless child they had pitied or ignored or mocked was no more. The name they had given him, Deku, the useless thing, had died in the flames of the raid. In his place lay a terrifying, beautiful, and unknown power. A boy who had prayed to the gods, and who, against all odds, had been answered. The world returned to Isa not in a rush, but in agonizingly slow increments. The first sensation was a deep, resonant ache that seemed to emanate from the marrow of his bones. It was a fundamental exhaustion, as if every fiber of his being had been stretched to its breaking point, and was now recoiling in protest. The second was the smell of wet earth, smoke, and something metallic and cloying that he knew, with a sickening certainty, was blood. The third was the sound of his mother's voice, a desperate, loving murmur that was the only point of warmth in a universe of cold pain. He forced his eyes open. The world was a blur of shifting shapes and the lurid orange of dying fires against a slate-gray dawn. He was in his own bed, in the small alcove of their partially destroyed longhouse. A rough-spun blanket was pulled up to his chin. His mother was beside him, wiping his brow with a damp cloth, her face a mask of sleepless worry. "Izu!" she breathed, relief washing over her features like a gentle tide. "By the gods, you're awake!" He tried to speak, but only a dry croak emerged. He tried to sit up, but a chorus of agony from his muscles sent him crashing back into the furs. He felt hollowed out. A vessel that had been filled with the power of a star and was now left with nothing but the cracks. He looked down at his arms, exposed by the blanket. They were no longer blank. Where the emerald light had blazed, faint, silvery lines now remained, scarred into his skin. They were runes, intricate and ancient, swirling over his flesh like patterns of frost on a winter window. They didn't glow, but he could feel them, a permanent, thrumming reminder of the foreign power that now resided within him. He was marked. Branded. The gods had seen him, and they had left their signature upon his very being. Over the next 2 days, Grenvik mourned. The pyres burned on the beach, sending columns of grey smoke to join the clouds, carrying the spirits of the fallen to the halls of their ancestors. Izu watched from the doorway of his home, a silent observer. The villagers were rebuilding, their movements grim and determined, but their interactions with him had changed irrevocably. When he walked through the village, a path cleared before him. Conversation ceased, replaced by hushed whispers that followed in his wake. People would not meet his eyes. They looked at his scarred arms, then quickly away, as if staring too long might invite the same terrible power that had saved them. He was a paradox they could not comprehend, their savior and a source of profound fear. He had been Deku, the useless thing. Now he was Izu Rumahand, Izu Thunderhand, a name whispered with a reverence that felt more like dread than respect. The isolation he had felt as a weakling was a comforting warmth compared to the chilling solitude of being a monster. He was a weapon that had been unsheathed, and no one, least of all himself, knew how to put it back. The proof of this came on the 3rd day. His body had healed with an unnatural speed, the deep ache receding to a low thrum. Filled with a restless energy and a desperate need to feel normal, to be useful in a way that didn't involve shattering bone, he decided to help with the rebuilding. He found a discarded wood axe near a pile of logs meant to replace the shattered wall of the long hall. Its handle was thick, its head heavy iron. He had struggled to even swing it properly a week ago. Now, it felt like a child's toy in his grip. He took a steadying breath, positioning himself before a large, round log. He focused, trying to remember the precise amount of force a normal man would use. He wanted to split the wood, not obliterate it. He raised the axe, the motion feeling unnervingly smooth and effortless, and brought it down in what he hoped was a controlled swing. The result was anything but. There was no satisfying thunk of blade biting into wood. There was a sound like a thunderclap ripping the air. The iron axe head didn't just split the log, it passed through it as if it were mist, struck the chopping block beneath, and shattered the solid stone into a dozen pieces. The log itself exploded in a shower of splinters and sawdust, the force of the blow turning solid oak into airborne pulp. The axe handle, unable to withstand the impossible physics of the impact, disintegrated in his hands, the wood turning to powder and stinging his palms. He was left standing there, holding a mere nub of wood, staring at the crater where the chopping block had been. A silence fell over the work party nearby. Old Rolf, the village elder, dropped the hammer he was holding with a clatter. His eyes were wide with the same terrified awe Isa was beginning to know so well. He took a half step back, as did the others, their hands instinctively going to the charms they wore around their necks. Isa looked at his own hands, the silvery runes a stark relief against his skin. This power, Thor's Megan, it wasn't a tool he could wield. It was a force that wielded him. He could break a raider's charge, but he could not chop wood for a fire. He could save a village, but he could not help rebuild it. Shame and frustration burned in his throat, hot and bitter. He dropped the shattered handle and fled, the fearful stares of the villagers like daggers in his back. He found sanctuary in his usual spot, the rocky overlook, the sea breeze a cold comfort on his hot face. He pulled out his journal, but for the first time in his life, the familiar weight of it offered no solace. What was the point of analyzing tactics when a single, thoughtless punch held more power than any strategy he could devise? He was a scholar of the sword in a world where he had become a living earthquake. That was where his mother found him, a small bowl of fish stew in her hands. She sat beside him, the silence between them comfortable. "They are afraid because they do not understand," she said softly, offering him the bowl. "You are afraid because you do not understand either." He took the stew, his hands trembling slightly. "How am I supposed to control this, Mother? I'm dangerous. I try to do something simple, and I break everything. What if I lose control near you? What if I hurt someone by accident?" "You won't," she said with unwavering certainty. "How can you be so sure?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Because the gods did not give you this power because you craved it," she explained, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "They gave it to you because of what was in your heart when you prayed. You asked for the power to protect Izu, not to conquer. That selflessness is your anchor. It is the one thing stronger than the power they placed in your hands. Trust your heart. It will guide your strength." Her words were a lifeline. He clung to them as a drowning man clings to driftwood. Trust your heart. It was a simple instruction for a problem of impossible complexity. He was still pondering her words when a commotion from the village below drew their attention. A boy, no older than 10, had stumbled into the village center and collapsed. He was caked in mud, his tunic torn, and his face was a mask of terror and exhaustion. Warriors rushed to him, helping him up, giving him water. Curiosity and a new, unfamiliar sense of responsibility pulled Isaac to his feet. He and his mother made their way down the path into the village. The crowd parted for him as he approached, allowing him a clear view of the boy, who was now gulping down water while babbling his story to Rolf. "Came back," the boy gasped, his words punctuated by panicked sobs. "The Huskers of the Maw, they didn't all die." A chill went through Izu. He had defeated their leader, driven them off. He had assumed the threat was over. "They came to Brunstader," the boy cried. "2 days ago. They didn't raid, they gave terms." He looked around at the grim faces of the Grenvik warriors. "They know they can't face the Green Jarl." The boy's eyes found Izu, and he flinched, shrinking back. "So they told us, tribute. Half our winter stores. All our silver. And 10 thralls, to be delivered by the next full moon, or they will burn the village to the ground and take everyone. Rolf the elder stroked his grey beard, his face grave. Brunstader has no standing guard to speak of. They're a village of farmers and fishers. Why have they not sent word to their Jarl? Jarl Sven is on a campaign in the Southern Isles. One of the warriors supplied. A raven would take a week to reach him, and his army a month to return. The full moon is in 5 days. The villagers exchanged nervous glances. They knew what this meant. Brunstader was alone, helpless. A collective sense of dread settled over them, thick and cloying as bog smoke. They had survived their own nightmare. They had no desire to involve themselves in another's. It is a terrible fate, Rolf declared, his voice carrying the weight of grim authority. But we have our own dead to bury, our own homes to rebuild. We cannot afford to make an enemy of the Maw again. We will send what aid we can spare after they have paid their price. It was a sensible, pragmatic decision. It was the decision of a man responsible for the survival of his people. And to Aizu, it felt like a dagger twisting in his gut. Pay their price. He looked at the terrified messenger boy, at his tear-streaked face and trembling frame, and he saw himself just a few nights ago, cowering in his home, praying for a savior. If we do nothing, a voice in his head whispered, we are no better than they are. His mother's words echoed in his mind. Trust your heart. His heart was screaming. He took a step forward. The crowd instinctively shifted, giving him space. All eyes were on him. He felt their fear, their expectation. They saw him as their shield, a divine weapon to be kept safe, to be hidden away until they were threatened again. They did not see him as a boy who had to make a choice. No, Aizu said. The word was quiet, but it cut through the murmurs like a sharp knife. Rolf turned to him, his expression a mixture of surprise and disapproval. No, boy. This is a matter for elders. You have done your part for this village. You have earned your rest. They are asking for people, Aizu said, his voice gaining strength. He looked from the elder to the other villagers, his gaze sweeping over them. They want to take 10 people from their families and put them in chains. We can't just let that happen. We know what that feels like. We know that fear. A murmur of dissent rippled through the crowd. He's right, one man said, but he was quickly shushed by his neighbor. We are weak, another called out. Our warriors are injured. We have no one to send but him, and we will not risk him for another village's troubles. Rolf boomed, pointing a trembling finger at Aizu. You are the protector of Grendvik now, boy. A gift from the gods. We will not squander you. The words were meant to be an honor, but they felt like a cage. They wanted to put him on a pedestal, a totem to ward off evil, not a person who could act, who could choose. The fear he'd felt before the battle, the uncertainty, it was all there, churning in his stomach. He didn't know if he could control the power. He didn't know if he could win. He still felt the phantom ache of the blessing in his bones. Part of him, the small, scared part that had been Deku, wanted nothing more than to agree with Rolf, to hide in his home and never feel that terrifying, soul-crushing power again. But then he looked at the messenger boy again, who was staring at him with a desperate, fragile glimmer of hope. He thought of his mother, standing between him and the raider chief. He thought of his prayer, not for glory, but for the strength to save. His mother's words gave him the final push. Trust your heart. He stood up straight, meeting the elder's gaze without flinching. The faintest trace of Tyr's will, the unbreakable courage, bled into his posture. My power wasn't given to me to protect just one village, he said, his voice ringing with a conviction that surprised even himself. It was given to me to protect people. All people. If I stand by and do nothing while the helpless suffer, then I am not worthy of this gift. I will go to Brunstader. A stunned silence fell over the village. His mother looked at him, her eyes shining with a mixture of terror and fierce pride. Rolf stared, his mouth agape. No one had ever spoken to him with such finality. I will go alone, Aizu added, seeing the fearful reluctance in the eyes of the other warriors. He would not ask them to risk themselves. This was his burden. His choice. Without another word, he turned and walked toward his home to gather what little he owned, a water skin, a chunk of hard bread, and his journal. He was no longer Isaac Renson, the boy who studied heroes. He was now, by his own conscious choice, attempting to become one. The journey to Brunstader took the better part of a day, a lonely trek along a winding coastal path. The world felt different to him now. His senses were sharper. He could smell the salt on the wind from miles away, hear the cry of a specific gull over the crashing of the waves, see the individual pebbles on the path with a startling clarity. It was as if a veil had been lifted from the world, and he was seeing its true, vibrant texture for the first time. It was a subtle, lingering effect of Odin's insight, a constant stream of information that was both fascinating and overwhelming. He arrived at the outskirts of Brunstader as the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and red. The village was cloaked in a palpable fear. Doors were barred, windows shuttered. A deathly quiet hung in the air, a stark contrast to the usual evening bustle of a fishing village. As he walked into the central clearing, a figure stepped out from behind a stack of fishing nets to block his path. It was a young woman, perhaps a year or two older than him, with a round, expressive face and a determined set to her jaw. Her brown hair was cut short and practical, and she wore a simple leather cuirass over a woolen tunic. In one hand she held a round shield, its face painted with a simple brown bird, and in the other, a short, broad-bladed axe. She was trying to project an aura of intimidating strength, but Isaac could see the fear and exhaustion in her deep brown eyes. "That's far enough, stranger," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor he could see in her axe hand. "We're not receiving visitors. State your purpose or turn back." "I'm from Grenvik," Isaac said simply. "Your messenger reached us. I've come to help." The shield maiden's eyes narrowed in suspicion. She looked him up and down, a boy small for his age, carrying nothing but a water skin and a book. He looked more like a scribe's apprentice than a warrior. "Help? Grenvik sent one boy to face them all? Is this some kind of cruel joke?" "My name is Izu," he said, ignoring the sting of her words. It was a familiar sting. A flicker of recognition crossed her face. Her eyes widened slightly. "Izu? The Green Jarl?" The name sounded absurd when applied to him. "The stories, they said you were a giant, wreathed in green flame. The stories are wrong," he said quietly. "I'm just me." Before she could reply, a horn blew from the direction of the sea, a harsh, ugly sound. The Huskarls. The shield maiden paled, her grip tightening on her weapons. "They're here for the first collection," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "Hide yourself, boy. There is no glory to be found here, only death." She turned to face the beach, squaring her shoulders, a lone, defiant figure against the encroaching darkness. Isa watched her, a spark of admiration cutting through his own anxiety. She was terrified, but she was standing her ground. She was a protector. He did not hide. He walked to stand beside her, his gaze fixed on the dark longship gliding toward their shore. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice calm. She glanced at him, surprised by his presence at her side. "Ochaka," she said. "Ochaka Brunsdottir." "Well, Ochaka Brunsdottir," Isa said, a faint, determined smile touching his lips. "Let's not give them what they came for." 10 raiders disembarked, their forms bulky and menacing in the twilight. They were led by a scarred, one-eyed man who walked with an arrogant swagger. They were laughing and joking, expecting no resistance. Their laughter died when they saw the lone shield maiden and the small boy standing before the path to the village. The one-eyed man sneered. "Look at this. The welcoming party. Step aside, little girl. We're here for our tribute." Ochaka stood firm, her shield raised. "Brunstader pays tribute to Jarl Sven, and no other. Leave this place, or you will be made to." The raiders erupted in laughter. "Made to? By you?" the leader mocked. He gestured to 2 of his men. "Teach her some manners." The 2 raiders charged, their axes raised. Isa's heart hammered in his chest. The familiar fear was there, a cold knot in his stomach. But this time, it was different. This time, he had made a choice. He took a deep breath, reaching for the power within him, not with a scream of desperation, but with a focused plea. Just enough. The strength to protect. The runes on his arms glowed, a soft, emerald luminescence in the twilight. Ochaka gasped beside him. The world sharpened. Odin's insight flooded his mind. He saw the paths of the charging raiders, the arcs of their swings, the slight imbalances in their footwork. It was like watching a dance whose steps he knew by heart. The first raider swung his axe in a wide, horizontal arc aimed at Ochaka's head. Before she could even fully raise her shield, Aiza moved. He stepped into the path of the blow, his hand shooting out, not to block, but to catch the axe head mid-swing. The impact was met not with the sound of shattered bone, but a dull thwump. The raider's arm shuddered to a halt as if he'd hit a stone wall. His eyes went wide with shock as he stared at the boy who had caught his full-force swing with one bare hand. Aiza tightened his grip. There was a groan of protesting metal, and he squeezed, crumpling the iron axe head in his fist as if it were a dried leaf. The second raider, stunned for only a moment, redirected his attack toward Aizu. He brought his axe down in a vicious overhead chop. Aizu, still holding the first raider's ruined weapon, simply raised his other arm. He didn't try to catch the blade. He let it hit his forearm. There was a loud clang, as if steel had struck an anvil. The axe blade, a weapon forged to split helms and shields, shattered on impact with his rune-scarred skin, the fragments flying off into the darkness. A collective gasp went through the raiders. Ochaka stared, her mouth agape, her mind refusing to process what she had just witnessed. Aiza looked at the two shocked men before him, his green eyes glowing with a soft, internal light. He felt the immense strength of Thor's Megan coursing through him, but this time, it wasn't a raging inferno, it was a controlled burn. He pushed, one hand against each of the raiders' chests. It wasn't a punch, just a firm shove, but it sent both men flying backward to land in a heap at their leader's feet. The stories. The one-eyed man breathed, his face draining of all color. It's you! The Green Jarl. Panic began to set in among the Huskarls. This was the boy who had broken their chief, the demon of Grendik. Aiza took a step forward. Leave, he said, his voice quiet but carrying an unnatural resonance. Leave and never return to these shores. The one-eyed man, his arrogance replaced by a desperate ferocity, roared. He's just one boy. Kill him! The remaining raiders charged as a group, a wave of steel and fury. Aiza met them. He didn't stand his ground, he flowed through them. A sword thrust was sidestepped with impossible grace. A thrown axe was plucked from the air. He used his strength with a newfound precision. He broke weapons, not bones. He struck shoulders and knees to disarm and disable, not chests and heads to kill. He moved with the prescient grace of Odin's insight, weaving through a flurry of deadly blows as if they were nothing more than a summer rain. Ochaka watched, mesmerized. It wasn't a brawl, it was an art form. She saw the overwhelming power, the divine strength that could have reduced these men to bloody paste in seconds. But she also saw the incredible, painstaking restraint. She saw him pivot at the last second to avoid a wild axe swing that would have hit the house behind him. She saw him shove a raider aside, not just to defeat him, but to put himself between the man and a small child who had peeked out from a nearby window. She saw the look on his face, not the bloodlust of a berserker, but the pained concentration of a surgeon performing a delicate task. He was wielding the power of a god with the heart of a shepherd. In less than a minute it was over. The Huskarls were disarmed and groaning on the beach, their weapons and their morale shattered. The one-eyed leader, his sword arm bent at an unnatural angle, scrambled back to the longship, his men crawling and stumbling after him. They shoved off with a desperate haste, their retreat even more frantic than the one at Grendik. As the longship vanished, the green light faded from Aiza's runes. The backlash hit him, and he staggered, leaning against a wooden pillar of the village dock for support. The divine energy receded, leaving him breathless and aching, the silver scars on his skin a dull reminder of the power he had just commanded. The villagers of Brunstader slowly emerged from their homes, their faces filled with disbelief and awe. They stared at the lone boy who had so effortlessly saved them, their whispers echoing the same fearful reverence he'd heard in his own village. But Ochaka did not whisper. Her heart was pounding, not with fear, but with a sudden, blazing clarity. She had heard tales of men blessed by the gods. They were Jarls who used their might to conquer, warriors who reveled in bloodshed and glory. They were forces of nature, to be feared and respected. But she had never heard of one like this. A boy who held the power of the thunder god in his fist but wielded it with the gentleness of a healer. A boy who faced down a band of killers not for glory or gold, but simply because it was the right thing to do. She walked toward him, her footsteps sure and steady on the sandy ground. He looked up as she approached, his green eyes weary but clear. He looked so young, so burdened. "Why?" she asked, her voice soft. "Why risk yourself for us? We are not your people." Isaac took a moment to catch his breath, his gaze drifting to the fearful villagers before returning to her. "I know what it's like to be helpless," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "To watch the people you care about be threatened, and to be able to do nothing but pray. I was given this chance to change that. I couldn't not use it." His answer was so simple, so pure, it struck her to the core. It wasn't about power. It wasn't about destiny. It was about empathy. In that moment she knew. She had spent her life training to be a shield maiden, dreaming of serving a Jarl worthy of her loyalty, a leader who was not just strong, but good. And here he was, not a Jarl in a high hall, but a boy leaning against a post, bearing a burden that would crush most men. She took a breath, the salt air filling her lungs, and made a choice of her own. She dropped to one knee before him, placing her axe on the ground and resting her fist on the painted bird of her shield. It was the formal oath of a warrior pledging fealty. Isa stared at her, his eyes wide with shock. What are you doing?" "I, Ochaka Brunsdaughter, of the village of Brunstader," she declared, her voice ringing with conviction in the quiet evening, "saw a strength today that was more than a gift from the gods. I saw a worthy heart to guide it. I swear my shield to your defense, my axe to your service, and my life to your cause, from this day until my last." "My Jarl." Isa was speechless. He stammered, "But I'm not a Jarl. I'm just Isa. I don't have anything to offer you. I don't even know what I'm doing." Ochaka looked up at him, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips for the first time. "You offer hope. And you're trying to do the right thing. In these isles, that's more than most Jarls can claim." She rose to her feet, picking up her axe. "You shouldn't have to carry this burden alone." For the first time since the green light had seared his skin, Isa didn't feel like a monster. He didn't feel like a weapon. He didn't feel like an outcast. Looking at the earnest, determined face of the shield maiden before him, he felt something new. He felt like a leader. And for the first time, he was not alone. The week that followed the liberation of Brunstader was a blur of motion. Izu and Ochaka traveled the coastal roads, their world defined by the crunch of leather boots on gravel, the taste of salt on the wind, and the flickering light of campfires under star-strewn skies. A new rhythm settled between them. Ochaka, practical and grounded, taught Izu the things his books never could: how to mend a cloak, how to find dry tinder in a damp wood, how to read the mood of a tavern by the slump of the patron's shoulders. In return, Isa shared his world of tactics and history, explaining the principles of a shield wall with gestures in the dirt, or recounting the sagas of Almatiger with a quiet, burning reverence. Their dynamic was one of complementary forces. Isa was the soul, the driving moral compass of their tiny, two-person crusade. Ochaka was its sturdy, reliable heart, ensuring that soul had a body that was fed, rested, and ready. She was the first person who treated his power not as a divine artifact or a terrifying curse, but as a tool. "Can you lift that log?" she'd ask, pointing to a fallen tree blocking their path. And Izu, with painstaking concentration, would learn to apply just enough of Thor's Megan to move the obstacle without turning it into sawdust. He began to develop a feel for the power, a sense of its texture and weight within him. It was no longer a maelstrom. It was a vast, deep reservoir, and he was slowly, cautiously, learning how to draw from it a cup at a time instead of opening the floodgates. Ochaka's own blessing was a quiet miracle. Her ability to lighten the weight of objects was subtle, yet she used it with an ingrained expertise. She could make her shield feel as light as a dinner plate, allowing her to block and parry with a speed that defied its size. She could touch her own boots and run for miles without tiring, her feet barely seeming to press into the earth. She called it the feather fall. A humble name for a gift that made her a pillar of speed and endurance. Their purpose, however, was becoming frighteningly clear. They were a patch on a dam that was cracking in 100 places. Every village they passed had a story of woe, a jarl's punishing taxes, a string of unexplained disappearances, or raids from clans pushed to desperation by famine. They stopped a group of thugs from shaking down a merchant, and saved a farmer's herd from rustlers. But these were small victories in a sprawling, lawless land. "We can't be everywhere at once," Ochaka said one evening, staring into the flames of their campfire. The firelight danced in her warm brown eyes, reflecting a deep-seated worry. "You have the strength of 100 men, Aizu. But you are still only one man. We are a shield and an axe. A warband needs a spear." Aizu looked up from his journal, where he'd been sketching a map of the region, marking the villages they'd helped. "A spear? Someone fast," she clarified, gesturing with the stick she was carving. "Someone who can strike quickly, scout ahead, carry messages. We are strong and we are steadfast." "We are not fast." He knew she was right. His mind, ever the analyst, immediately began to process the tactical deficiency. They were a defensive unit, a mobile fortress. To truly be effective, to proactively stop threats instead of just reacting to them, they needed an element of speed and precision. It was in the bustling market town of Ravensvik that they first heard the name. The marketplace was a chaotic symphony of sound and smell. The clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the bleating of goats, the sharp tang of brine from the fishmonger's stall, and the earthy scent of traded furs. They were replenishing their supplies when they overheard two merchants arguing near a weapons stall. "And I tell you, he cost me the sale! Just appeared out of nowhere, quoted some obscure passage from the old code of weights and measures, and declared my scales unbalanced by a hair's breadth." A hair's breadth. The portly merchant complained, his face flushed with indignation. His companion, a wiry man selling leather goods, chuckled. "You were lucky it was only your scales," he judged. "I saw him in the northern pass last spring. A dozen bandits tried to ambush a caravan, a blue and silver blur, that's all he was. Before they could even raise their swords, they were all tied up neat as a bundle of hides. Didn't kill a single one, just lectured them for 20 minutes on the legal ramifications of highway robbery. They say he's the son of Tenir the Just, the Jarl who was exiled for speaking out against the High Council." A third man, a grizzled trapper, spat a wad of chewing tobacco onto the ground. "Ironlegs Tennyson, they call him. Cursed with a god's speed but the temperament of a tax collector. He wanders the Isles, looking for a Jarl worthy of his family's oath. Hasn't found one yet. Too busy making sure everyone's bootlaces are tied to the regulation length." Aizu listened, his curiosity piqued. A warrior of incredible speed, dedicated to a strict code of honor and justice, who fought without killing? It sounded too perfect, like a character from one of the sagas he so admired. Ochaka had been listening too, her expression thoughtful. She caught Aizu's eye and gave a subtle nod. "A spear," she mouthed silently. They spent the next day asking questions, following the trail of rumors left in the wake of this enigmatic warrior. His path was easy to track. Everywhere he went, he left behind a wake of perfectly resolved disputes, flawlessly organized woodpiles, and bewildered locals who had been sternly reprimanded for minor infractions of etiquette or law. They found him in a small, muddy village called Grimsdal, a place so insignificant it barely appeared on Aizu's hand-drawn maps. The scene in the village square was exactly as the merchants had described. Two farmers, red-faced and shouting, stood on opposite sides of a poorly marked property line. Between them stood a young man who seemed utterly incongruous with his surroundings. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a square jaw and dark blue hair so neatly combed it looked sculpted. He wore immaculate silver-chased steel armor that gleamed even in the overcast light, and thick, powerful greaves that seemed fused to his legs. He was gesturing with sharp, precise chops of his hand, his expression one of intense, unwavering seriousness. This was Ingvar Tennyson, and therefore, Ingvar was saying, his voice a crisp, authoritative baritone that cut through the farmers' bickering. According to the precedent set in Jarl Hakon's adjudication of fencing disputes, paragraph 3, section B, the stone in question falls precisely 7/10 of a pace inside your property. Farmer Gudmund. Farmer Olaf, your claim to it is legally baseless and your attempt to move it constitutes a level 4 property infringement. Farmer Olaf, a stout man with a beard full of indignation, sputtered. But my grandfather told me, anecdotal evidence is inadmissible. Ingvar snapped, holding up a hand to silence him. His movements were so rigid and exact they seemed mechanical. The law is the bedrock upon which civilization is built. Without its precise and unwavering application, we descend into chaos. Aizu and Ochaka watched from the edge of the square. Aizu was fascinated. The sheer logical rigor of the man was captivating. Ochaka, on the other hand, looked faintly exasperated. He's intense, she whispered. He's principled. Aizu countered, his eyes shining with admiration. Once the dispute was settled, with Farmer Olaf grumbling and Farmer Gudmund looking smug, Ingvar stood alone in the square, his posture as straight and unyielding as a spear. Aizu took a deep breath and approached, Ochaka at his side. Ingvar's sharp, intelligent eyes snapped to them. He took in Aizu's small frame and simple clothes, Ochaka's practical armor, and the faint, silvery runes on Aizu's arms. His expression, already severe, hardened into one of distinct disapproval. Greetings, Aizu began, offering a polite nod. You are Ingvar Tennyson? We heard tales of your deeds and sought you out. I perform no deeds, Ingvar stated flatly, his gaze fixed on Aizu's arms. I merely uphold the law and my family's code of conduct. You are the one they call the Green Jarl, the boy who was gifted a god's rage and a flash of light. The way he said gifted made it sound like an insult. I was blessed, yes, Aizu said, feeling a familiar need to defend himself. I use the power to help people. Ingvar took a step closer, his height and sheer presence imposing. Do you? Or does the power use you? I have heard the stories. You shattered a man's axe with your fist. You broke a chieftain's body. Your power is a maelstrom, a chaotic, undisciplined force. Strength without a framework of honor and discipline is merely a more efficient form of destruction. It is unearned, and therefore, it is untrustworthy. The words struck Aizu with the force of a physical blow. Of all the reactions he'd received, fear, awe, reverence, this cold, logical disdain was the most painful. It mirrored his own deepest insecurities about the power he wielded. You're wrong, Ochaka interjected, stepping forward slightly, her hand resting on the pommel of her axe. I was there. I saw him hold back. He could have killed them all, but he chose not to. His strength is guided by his compassion. Ingvar's gaze flickered to her, dismissive. Compassion is an emotion. It is fickle. A warrior's actions must be guided by code and by law. Unwavering principles. This boy has none. He is a child playing with a thunderbolt. He turned his full attention back to Aizu. You seek me out. Why? Do you wish for me to swear my family's oath to a power I do not respect? I want to build something, Aizu said, his voice quiet but earnest. A war band, a force that can protect the villages that the Jarls ignore. A force that stands for justice, not just for the strong, but for everyone. Your speed, your dedication to the law, we need that. A flicker of something, perhaps intrigue, passed through Ingvar's eyes, but it was quickly suppressed. A noble sentiment. But words are wind. An honorable foundation cannot be built upon chaotic power. You must prove that you are more than the blessing that marks your skin. You must prove you possess a warrior's mind, not just a god's fist. How? Aizu asked, his jaw set with determination. Ingvar's gaze shifted to a jagged, windswept tor that loomed over the village. Upon that tor, known as Crow's Perch, is a makeshift fort. It is the den of a band of exiles and cutthroats who call themselves the Splintered Axe Clan. They have been preying on travelers and stealing from these very villages for months. A week ago, they raided a holy shrine and stole a ceremonial banner, the banner of the Gilded Sun, an artifact of my family from before our disgrace. His expression tightened, a hint of personal pain showing through the rigid exterior. I have been planning a direct assault to retrieve it. But I will offer you a trial instead. Go to that fort, retrieve my family's banner. But you will do so under two conditions. He held up two fingers, straight and severe. 1. You will not kill any of them. True justice is corrective, not merely punitive. 2. You will not simply smash your way through the gates. Anyone with the strength of a battering ram can knock down a wall. You will use strategy. Cunning. You will prove that you are a leader, not just a weapon. He crossed his arms, his armored form seeming to merge with the gray sky behind him. Succeed, and I will consider your offer. Fail, and you will leave me to my duties. Do we have an accord? Aiza looked at Ochaka. She met his gaze with a steady, confident nod. This was a challenge made for him. It wasn't a test of his strength, but of his mind and his heart. The very things his mother had told him were his true assets. Accord, Aiza said, his voice firm. They spent the rest of the day hidden in a copse of windswept pines on a ridge overlooking Crow's Perch. Ingvar remained in the village, a silent, distant judge. The fort was a ramshackle affair, a crude palisade of sharpened logs built around a collection of crumbling stone ruins. But it was well manned. Aiza counted at least 15 members of the splintered axe clan, burly men armed with a motley collection of axes, swords, and spears. While Ochaka kept watch, Aiza sat with his journal open on his lap. But he wasn't just observing. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and reached for the quiet hum of Odin's insight. He didn't draw on the overwhelming battle precognition, but on the subtler, secondary aspect of the gift, the enhanced perception, the ability to see patterns in chaos. The world behind his eyelids resolved into a map of ethereal light. He saw the patrol routes of the sentries not as they were now, but as they would be in an hour, and an hour after that. He saw the structural weaknesses in the palisade, the loose logs, the section built on softer ground. He saw the flow of life within the fort, the cook fires being lit, the changing of the guard, the moments of lax attention. He was seeing the fort's rhythm, its heartbeat. His hand flew across the page, charcoal scratching furiously. He sketched the layout of the fort, the guard towers, the central longhouse where the banner was likely kept. He drew arrows indicating patrol paths, marked timings, and formulated a plan of infiltration with 3 distinct phases. When he was done, he showed it to Ochaka. Her eyes widened as she looked at the impossibly detailed drawing. How did you know about the loose beam on the western wall? I just saw it. Aiza mumbled, unable to explain the sensation properly. Ochaka studied the plan, her practical mind immediately seeing its brilliance. A diversion, she murmured, tapping a section of the drawing. It's risky. But it could work. They waited until the deepest point of the night, when the moon was hidden behind thick clouds and the only light came from the guttering torches on the fort's walls. They moved like shadows through the woods, their steps silent. Phase 1, Infiltration. They reached the western wall, at the spot Aiza had marked. It was the fort's blind spot, furthest from the 2 guard towers. Ochaka placed her hand on the rough-hewn log Aiza had indicated. She closed her eyes for a moment, and the air around the log seemed to shimmer. She gave it a gentle push, and the massive, heavy beams swung inward as silently and easily as a simple gate. The featherfall. They slipped through the opening, and Ochaka guided the beam back into place. They were inside. They pressed themselves into the shadows of a dilapidated hut, their hearts pounding in time with the snores of a nearby sleeping bandit. The air was thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, stale ale, and wood smoke. Phase 2, Diversion. Aiza pointed toward the far side of the compound, where a large, precariously stacked pile of firewood and barrels sat near the main gate. It was over 100 feet away. He closed his hand into a fist, the runes on his arm beginning to emit a soft, pulsing green glow. He wasn't aiming for destructive power. He needed precision. He focused, picturing a stone, a pebble, flying from his hand. He flicked his finger. There was no thunderclap, no explosion. Just a faint whiz as a tiny, compressed pellet of air, propelled by a minuscule fraction of Thor's Megan, shot across the compound. It struck the wooden pin holding a retaining rope for the woodpile. The rope snapped. With a tremendous, splintering crash, the entire pile of logs and barrels tumbled down, smashing against the inside of the main gate. The fort erupted into chaos. What in the name of Loki's boils was that? A voice roared. The gate! Something's at the gate! Another shouted. Torches were lit. Men poured out of the longhouse, weapons drawn, all rushing toward the source of the commotion, their backs to the shadows where Aizu and Ochaka hid. The diversion had worked perfectly. Phase 3, Retrieval. They darted from shadow to shadow, making their way to the now empty longhouse. Inside, the air was stale. Furs and discarded armor littered the floor, and there, draped over a large wooden chair that served as a makeshift throne, was the banner. It was a magnificent thing, a field of deep blue silk with a sunburst embroidered in shimmering gold thread. It was beautiful, a piece of art amidst the squalor. Ochaka moved to grab it, but Aiza held up a hand, his eyes narrowed. Odin's insight was screaming a warning. His gaze darted around the room and settled on the floorboards around the chair. He saw them, faint tripwires, almost invisible in the gloom, connected to a series of small bells hung just inside the doorway. A trap, he whispered. He carefully traced the path of the wires with his eyes, finding a safe route to the chair. He navigated it with a dancer's grace, retrieved the banner, and folded it carefully. They were about to slip out when the longhouse door creaked open. A single bandit, a massive, bald man with a scar cleaving one eyebrow, had stayed behind, suspicious of the convenient timing of the crash. He stood silhouetted in the doorway, his eyes adjusting to the dark. His gaze fell upon them, his mouth opened to shout a warning. Before a sound could escape his lips, a blue and silver blur shot past him from the darkness outside. It was Ingvar. He moved with a speed that defied the eye, a gust of wind given human form. There was a series of rapid, precise thuds. The bandit grunted, his arms and legs suddenly bound by a rope that seemed to have materialized out of thin air. He toppled backward onto the ground outside, trussed up like a holiday boar, a gag neatly tied in his mouth. Ingvar stood in the doorway, a coil of rope in his hand, his expression unreadable. He had followed them. He had watched the entire operation. "Your diversion was adequate," he said, his voice a low monotone that failed to conceal a hint of grudging respect. "Your stealth is commendable. Let us depart before the rest of these degenerates realize they have been duped." The escape was a blur of controlled chaos. Ingvar, a phantom of motion, led the way, disabling the 2 sentries in the guard towers with silent, non-lethal precision before they even knew what was happening. Aiza and Ochaka followed in his wake. As they slipped back out through the secret opening in the palisade, Aiza used a flicker of his strength to shove the heavy log back into place, sealing the fort once more. By the time the splintered Axe clan realized their banner was gone, their sentries were tied up, and the intruders had vanished, the trio was already halfway down the tor, melting into the pre-dawn mist. They stopped at the base of the hill as the first rays of sun crested the horizon, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold. Aizu, breathing heavily, unfurled the banner. The golden thread seemed to catch the morning light, blazing with a renewed glory. He held it out to Ingvar. Ingvar took it, his armored fingers tracing the embroidered sunburst. He stared at it for a long moment, his stern facade cracking just enough to reveal a deep, profound emotion. This was more than just a piece of cloth. It was a connection to his family, to the honor he was so desperate to reclaim. He raised his eyes to meet Aiza's. The disdain was gone, replaced by a look of intense, analytical evaluation. "You succeeded," Ingvar stated. "You followed the parameters of the trial to the letter. Your strategy was sound, your execution flawless. You possess a tactical mind worthy of a Jarl." He paused, his gaze thoughtful. "But that is not what has convinced me." Aiza looked at him, confused. "Then what did?" "Your objective," Ingvar said, his voice resonating with a new gravity. "When you spoke to me in the village, you did not speak of glory, or of conquest, or of riches. You spoke of protecting the weak, of creating order, of upholding justice." He looked from the banner in his hands to the distant, peaceful village below. "My father was disgraced and my family exiled because he believed that the law should serve the people, not the other way around. The Jarls of the Yagi Isles have forgotten this. They use their power to carve out kingdoms for themselves, while bandits thrive and good folk suffer. They have forgotten their duty." He took a deep breath, his decision made. You have not. That power you wield," he said, gesturing to Aiza's arms. "It is chaotic, dangerous, but it is housed within a vessel that seeks to impose a just order upon that chaos. That is a purpose my family was sworn to uphold." With a sound of grating steel, Ingvar Tennyson, the honorable son, knelt on the damp earth. He planted the staff of the banner before him and placed the gauntlet fist on the ground. It was the formal oath of a knight to his lord, an act of ultimate fealty. "I was a fool," he said, his head bowed. "I judged the nature of your power without first understanding the nature of your character. I see now that your heart provides the code that your blessing lacks. It is a worthy foundation." He looked up, his sharp blue eyes boring into Isa's, filled with a newfound, unwavering loyalty. "I, Ingvar of the House of Tenya, swear my speed to your cause. I will be your vanguard, your messenger, your unwavering spear. I will bring order to your strength and discipline to your ranks. Allow me to help you build this better world you speak of." "My Jarl," Isa stared down at the kneeling warrior, a sense of awe washing over him. Beside him, Ochaka beamed, her face radiating pride. This was it. This was the beginning. They were no longer just two friends on a desperate quest. They were a shield, a spear, and a mind. He reached out and placed a hand on Ingvar's armored shoulder. "Stand up, Ingvar," Isa said, his voice steady and sure. "We have work to do." Far from the sun-drenched coasts and wind-scoured plains of the Yagi Isles, in a place forgotten by maps and unmarked by the passage of seasons, lay a wound in the world. It was a fortress carved not from the mountains, but into their very roots, a subterranean citadel of cyclopean basalt and obsidian that seemed to drink the light and exhale a profound, soul-deep cold. No birds sang in the blighted lands above it, and no grass grew. The air itself was thin and ancient, tasting of dust and static. This was the heart of a long-festering shadow, the throne room of a power that had 1,000 names in terrified whispers but only one true title, Master. The journey to the throne room was an ordeal designed to break the spirit. Hrolf of the Maw, once the proud and fearsome leader of the Huskarls, was now a trembling wreck of a man. He stumbled through corridors of unnatural geometry, halls that twisted in ways that made his eyes water and his stomach churn. The runes carved into the walls did not glow with the honest blue of a sea god's blessing or the hardy red of a fire spirit's favor. They writhed with a sickly, violet-black light, seeming to squirm like worms beneath the stone. The silence was absolute, broken only by the drip-drip-drip of some thick, ichorous ooze from the vaulted ceiling and the frantic, hammering beat of his own heart. He clutched his left arm, where a deep, festering wound from a collapsing hut at Grenvik refused to heal. He had faced down krakens and battled ice trolls in the frozen north. He had laughed in the face of jarls and spit on the altars of their gods. But this place, and the being that resided at its center, terrified him in a way that clean steel and honest battle never could. Finally, he reached the sanctum. It was a vast cavern, so large the ceiling was lost in a press of absolute darkness. The floor was a polished obsidian disk, reflecting the writhing runes on the walls, making it seem as if he were standing on a frozen, accursed sky. In the center of the disk sat a throne, not carved from stone or wood, but seemingly grown from the same light-devouring basalt as the walls. And upon it, there was a figure. It was less a man and more a void in human shape. Cloaked in robes the color of dried blood and shadow, the figure was utterly still. No discernible face was visible within the deep cowl of his hood, only a deeper darkness. Around his neck, a heavy collar of tarnished, rune-etched iron pulsed with a faint, sickly luminescence, and from a device fixed to it came a slow, rhythmic, mechanical breath, inhale, exhale, a sound that was a constant, deliberate presence in the crushing silence. This was Otterhin Allshungre. The All-Hungry. Hrolf dropped to one knee, pressing his forehead to the cold, unforgiving floor. "My lord," he rasped, his voice raw with fear. I have returned. I bring news of the failure at Grenvik." The slow, mechanical breathing continued for a long, agonizing moment. Then a voice emerged from the cowl. It was not one voice, but many, a dry, layered cacophony of stolen voices, from ancient kings to forgotten chieftains, all speaking in a chilling, melodic unison. "Failure is not news, Hrolf. It is a debt. And I have come to collect." "My lord, there was a boy," Hrolf stammered, his words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "A slip of a thing, no runes, no muscle. We had the village. It was ours. Then a light, a green light, like the heart of a cursed star. He was blessed, my lord. On the battlefield itself. The strength of a god descended upon him. He risked a glance up. The figure on the throne had not moved, yet Hrolfr felt a gaze of immense weight and antiquity settle upon him. He broke your chieftain, a man who possessed the blessing of the stone Jotun, with a single blow. The layered voice stated, not as a question, but as a fact. He shattered iron axe heads with his bare hands. He moved with a prescience that rendered your berserkers clumsy children. He drove you from the field, a pack of whipped dogs. Your report is redundant. I felt the shockwave of the blessing, even from here. A raw, untamed power, reeking of the old pantheon. Odious. Forgive me, master, Hrolfr pleaded, prostrating himself again. I did not know. No one could have predicted such a thing, and that is precisely why you have failed. Otter said, the voice losing its melodic quality, and becoming as sharp and cold as glacial ice. He rose from the throne. He did not seem to walk, but to glide over the obsidian floor, a patch of absolute night moving through the gloom. He came to a stop before the kneeling Husko. A hand emerged from the shadowy robes. It was long-fingered and unnaturally pale, with veins that pulsed with the same dark, violet light as the runes on the walls. You were given a simple task, Hrolfr. Sow fear. Test the defenses. Weaken the herd. Instead, you stumbled into a miracle. You have not only failed to bring me a harvest, you have planted a seed of hope. Hope is a weed in the garden of despair I so carefully cultivate. It must be uprooted. The pale hand came to rest gently on Hrolfr's head. It was not heavy, but it felt to Hrolfr as if a mountain had been placed upon him. A cold, dread-filled lethargy began to seep into his limbs. Please, my lord, he whimpered, his strength failing. I can still serve you. I will take my warband and your warband is scattered. Otter interrupted, his voice a sibilant whisper now, a chorus of ghosts in Hrolfr's ear. And your service is concluded. But your debt will be paid, Hrolfr screamed. It was a choked, gurgling sound. Red-black tendrils of energy, thin as spider silk, erupted from Otter's fingertips, plunging into Hrolfr's skull. They were not physical. They were ethereal, plunging past flesh and bone to grasp his very soul. Hrolfr's body began to convulse violently. He felt his life being drawn out of him, a torrent of warmth and vitality flowing up through the tendrils into the chilling emptiness of his master. He felt his memories being sifted through, tasted, and discarded like oyster shells. He felt his rage, his greed, his fear, all of it consumed. And he felt the last, most precious thing he owned being targeted, his minor blessing. He was not a warrior of renown, but he had been born under a strange star, marked by a minor spirit of endurance. It was the blessing of the unflagging will, the thing that allowed him to fight for days without tiring, that made his stamina legendary among the Huskers. He felt the tendrils latch onto that spark of divine energy within him, and they pulled. It was an agony beyond any physical wound, the feeling of his soul being torn in two. The small, internal light of his blessing was ripped from its mooring and siphoned into the waiting darkness of the all-hungry. Otter inhaled, a long, deep, satisfying breath that was not mechanical. A faint, sanguine glow pulsed from the runes on his collar. He had fed. He released Hrolfr. What fell to the floor was no longer a man. It was a husk. A desiccated, shriveled thing with skin like gray parchment stretched tight over a skeleton. The eyes were wide, empty sockets of terror, the mouth frozen in a silent scream. In seconds, the husk crumbled to a pile of fine, gray dust on the obsidian floor. A faint breeze coming from nowhere swept the dust away, leaving the floor as pristine and empty as before. Otter glided back to his throne, the mechanical breathing resuming its steady, rhythmic beat. He flexed his pale fingers, savoring the meager trickle of stolen vitality. The unflagging will was a paltry gift, a drop of water to a man dying of thirst, but it was something. For decades, no, for centuries, he had survived on these drops, these morsels. He had orchestrated 100 wars, engineered 1,000 famines, sponsored countless acts of piracy and betrayal, all to keep the Yagi Isles in a constant state of turmoil. War was his harvest field. Chaos was his fertilizer. And the blessed warriors who rose to prominence in these desperate times? They were his crop. He would let them grow strong, let them drink deep of the glory and power their blessings afforded them. He would let them become legends, their names sung in the long halls. And then, at the peak of their power, he would pluck them. He would consume their blessings, their life force, their very sagas, adding their strength to his own, patching the ancient, grievous wounds that kept his true power chained. It was a slow, painstaking process, rebuilding an existence that had been shattered by the so-called gods and their champion of old, the one they called Almatiger. A new figure emerged from the shadows at the edge of the cavern, shuffling forward with a stooped, obsequious gait. He was ancient, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, his eyes hidden behind thick spectacles made of polished quartz. He wore the robes of a skald, a poet, but they were filthy and tattered. This was the corrupted skald, Otter's eyes and ears in the world above, his most trusted servant. Master, the skald rasped, his voice thin and reedy. You felt it then. The report from the mall was true. It was more than true. Otter's voice echoed in the cavern. The blessing was not from some petty Jotun or forest spirit. It was a direct bestowal. I tasted the echo of the Bifrost in it. Thor's Megan, Tyr's will. And something else. Something subtle. The thread of foresight. Odin's insight. The skald's eyes widened behind his quartz lenses. All three of the great war gods? In one vessel? Such a thing has not been seen since the Age of Heroes. Indeed, Otter mused. He steepled his long, pale fingers. A confluence of this magnitude is no accident. It is a response. The owls have been bled for so long they have finally cried out, and the old fools in Asgard have answered. They seek to raise a new champion. A new Almatiger. A low, rumbling chuckle, like stones grinding in the deep earth, emanated from the cowl. They are fools. They see a fire breaking out in their fields and seek to quench it with a waterskin, unaware that I am the one who poisoned the well. They think to raise a hero to unite the land, but all they have done is cultivate a prime specimen for my collection. I have gathered more intelligence, my lord, the skald said, bowing low. The boy's name is Isaac Grenson, of the village of Grenvik. Before the blessing, he was an outcast. Mocked for his weakness, they called him Deku, the useless thing. This information seemed to genuinely intrigue the all-hungry. The mechanical breathing hitched for a moment. From the weakest vessel comes the purest prayer, he murmured. He did not ask for power for himself, did he? His plea was selfless. That is the only key that can unlock such a gift. Fascinating. And now, he has left his village, master. The skald continued, consulting a scroll of human skin. He travels with a shield maiden, Ochaka Brunsdaughter, who possesses a minor blessing of weight manipulation. They have journeyed to Brunstader and driven off the remainder of Hrolf's war band. Just yesterday, they were seen in the company of Ingvar Tennyson, the honorable son. Otter's voice dripped with contempt. The last whelp of a disgraced house, who runs around quoting laws to bandits. He is blessed with the speed of the summer winds, a gift he squanders on arbitrating property disputes. A fine tool, rusted by an excess of morality. The boy is gathering followers, the skald summarized. He is uniting the desperate. He is becoming a symbol. He is becoming a problem. Otter corrected, the amusement in his voice gone, replaced by a chilling pragmatism. A delicious, fascinating, once-in-a-millennium problem. A blessing of this purity, this magnitude, it is not a simple meal. It is a feast. Consuming it could mend the last of the great wounds. It could restore to me a measure of my true glory, but a meal of this quality must not be rushed. The fruit must be allowed to ripen. He fell silent for a moment, the only sound the rhythmic hiss-clank of his breathing apparatus. He was weighing his options, his ancient mind moving with the slow, inexorable certainty of a glacier. I could go myself, he mused. Pluck this green-haired weed before he takes root. But that would be crude. It would draw the eye of Asgard more directly. And besides, where is the art in that? No, a specimen of this quality must be tested. Its limits must be explored. I must see how this divine power reacts under pressure. I must see it break. He raised a hand, and one of the writhing, violet runes on the wall of the cavern pulsed brightly, then detached itself from the stone. It flew through the air, a screaming specter of dark energy, and hovered before the throne. Skald, Otter commanded. Bring me the vessel. The corrupted skald bowed low and scurried away into a dark side tunnel. Minutes later he returned, followed by a clanking, dragging sound. Two hulking, troll-like creatures were hauling a massive iron cage. Inside the cage was a thing that had once been a man. Or rather, many men. It was a giant, its body a horrific patchwork of mismatched limbs and muscles, crudely stitched together with thick, black sutures that seemed to move of their own accord. One arm was thick and corded, like a jarl's, while the other was lean and wiry, like a scout's. Its legs were mismatched pillars of muscle. Its head was a scarred, brutish thing, its eyes a milky white, its brain exposed to the air through a crude opening in the skull, where sickly runes pulsed directly on the living tissue. It wore no armor, only a pair of ragged trousers. It was a golem of flesh, an abomination of stolen parts. The culmination of our recent harvests, Otter said, a hint of pride in his layered voice. The strength of Jarl Iron Grip Van. The speed of Leith the Swift. The resilience of Bjorn the Unbreakable. 3 blessings, all stolen, all stitched together into one mindless, obedient puppet. A crude instrument, but a powerful one. He gestured with his pale hand, and the hovering, violet rune shot forward, plunging into the exposed brain of the creature. The creature, which had been slumped and docile, suddenly stiffened. A low, guttural moan escaped its lips. Its muscles spasmed and swelled, the black sutures writhing as the dark magic sealed them completely. The milky white eyes suddenly blazed with a malevolent, purple light. It stood to its full, monstrous height, straining against the bars of the cage, which groaned and buckled under the new, incredible power. You will go into the world of light, Otter commanded, his voice no longer a chorus, but a single, powerful command that resonated in the very bones of his creation. The creature, this Draugr, this Huskro Prime, cocked its head, its movements bird-like and unnatural. It understood. You will find the boy, Isaac Grenson. You will find him and his companions. Otter continued, his voice dropping to a predatory whisper. You will not kill him. Not yet. You will engage him. You will force him to use the full measure of his new power. You will push him past his limits. You will break his body, shatter his spirit, and destroy the hope of those who follow him. The monster in the cage let out a low, bubbling roar of anticipation, its new intelligence focused on a single, destructive purpose. Show him what true strength is, Otter commanded, a cruel smile finally touching the edge of the void beneath his cowl. Show him that the blessings of the gods are nothing more than fleeting sparks in the face of my eternal hunger. Test him. Break him. He paused, savoring the final command, the ultimate purpose of this horrific errand. But leave the core of the blessing intact. I wish to savor it myself when it is properly tenderized. The corrupted skald pulled a lever on the wall, and the bars of the cage retracted into the floor. The creature, free at last, took one lumbering step, then another. It stretched its mismatched limbs, its head turning from side to side as it acclimated to its reforged body. Then, with a roar that was a horrific fusion of a dozen different dying screams, it charged out of the sanctum, its thunderous footsteps echoing down the unnatural corridors, carrying it up, and out into the unsuspecting world above. Otter the All-Hungry watched it go, the sanguine light in his collar pulsing gently. The board was set. The new piece was in play. Now, he would simply watch, and wait, and hunger. The little green Jarl and his honorable followers had no idea what was coming for them. They had no idea that their greatest struggles, their most heroic victories, were merely the appetizers for a feast that had been centuries in the making. The world had begun to change around Aizu. It wasn't a grand, sweeping transformation, but a series of small, significant shifts. The addition of Ingvar Tennyson to their party had fundamentally altered their dynamic and their capabilities. He was a force of disciplined motion, a whirlwind of efficiency and unwavering principle. Their camp was always perfectly organized, their marching pace precisely calculated for maximum speed with minimum exhaustion, and their meager finances meticulously accounted for in a small ledger Ingvar produced from a waterproof pouch. He was their spear. While Aizu and Ochaka provided the stable core, Ingvar would scout leagues ahead, a blur of silver and blue against the green landscape. He would return with flawless intelligence on bandit movements, crumbling bridges, or villages in need of aid. His speed allowed them to be proactive, to intercept threats rather than merely responding to them. They were no longer just a reaction, they were becoming a solution. Aizu, in turn, found himself changing. He was still the quiet, analytical boy at heart, but the mantle of leadership was a weight that was slowly forcing him to grow stronger, straighter. Ingvar deferred to his final judgment on all tactical matters, his unwavering respect a constant, surprising affirmation of Aizu's own mind. Ochaka, with her steadfast belief and pragmatic optimism, kept him grounded, reminding him of the human cost behind every strategic decision. He was the head, Ingvar the limbs, and Ochaka the heart of their nascent war band. But with their growing effectiveness came a new, more dangerous currency: reputation. Stories of the Green Jarl and his companions were spreading, carried by merchants and traveling skalds. They were whispers at first, then tavern tales, then full-blown sagas. They were called the Hope-bringers, the shield of the helpless. And with that reputation came petitions. Desperate villagers would seek them out, not with tales of simple bandits, but of darker, stranger things. It was in a smoky long hall in the foothills of the Jotun's Tooth Mountains that they heard the rumor of the demon. The Jarl of the region, a nervous man named Finn with a perpetually sweating brow, spoke of a terror that haunted the high passes. "It's not a beast," he insisted, wringing his hands. "My best hunters have seen it. It's a man, or the shape of a man. They say he commands the very elements. One moment he strikes with a wall of biting ice, the next he burns the forest with a torrent of unnatural fire." He shuddered, taking a long pull from his drinking horn. "They call him the Scorchfrost Demon. He has made the northern pass to the ore-rich lands of ice and fall impassable. Anyone who ventures there is found days later, either frozen solid or burned to a cinder. He is a curse upon my lands." Aizu listened, his brow furrowed in concentration. He was sketching in his journal a map of the Jotun's Tooth Range. A warrior who wielded both fire and ice. It sounded like a blessing, or perhaps two blessings. A gift of impossible power. "Why would someone do this?" Ochaka asked, her voice laced with empathy. "Block a pass? Attack travelers without cause? Perhaps he is defending something." "He is defending his madness," Jarl Finn declared. "He is an outcast, a monster. I will grant a chest of silver and the title of Thane to any who can slay this demon and reopen the pass." Ingvar, standing ramrod straight by the fire, his arms crossed over his gleaming breastplate, spoke for the first time. "Slaying a man without a trial is not justice. It is murder. We must first ascertain the facts of the situation. Is this demon acting with malicious intent, or is there a mitigating circumstance we are not aware of?" The Jarl scoffed. "Mitigating? He froze my tax collector solid. Right in the middle of the road." Ingvar adjusted his spectacles, which he had recently acquired in a trade and now wore with an air of immense scholarly gravity. "While a deplorable act of violence," he conceded with perfect seriousness, "one could argue that attacking a tax collector does not, in and of itself, constitute an act of pure, unprovoked evil." Aizu suppressed a smile. He looked at the map, at the isolated, forbidding peaks where this so-called demon had made his lair. A person blessed by the gods, living in self-imposed exile, feared and reviled by the world around him. The story resonated with a painful familiarity. He saw a warped reflection of his own journey, of the fear and isolation he'd felt after the raid on Grenvik. "He might not be a demon," Aizu said quietly, his charcoal stick hovering over the drawing. "He might just be someone who is scared. Someone who needs help." He looked up, his decision already made, his green eyes filled with a quiet resolve. "We're not going to slay him. We're going to talk to him." Jarl Finn stared at him as if he had sprouted a second head. Ingvar, however, gave a single, sharp nod of approval. Ochaka's expression softened with pride. This was the Aizu she had sworn her shield to, the one who saw a person where others saw only a monster. The ascent into the Jotun's Tooth Mountains was arduous. The cheerful green lowlands gave way to hardy pine forests, then to barren, windswept scree. The air grew thin and cold, and a biting wind howled through the jagged peaks, carrying the taste of ice. They followed the northern pass, a treacherous road that clung to the side of the mountain. The first sign that they were entering the demon's territory was stark and terrifying. A grove of ancient pines on the far side of a ravine was utterly flash-frozen. Thick, unnatural sheets of ice coated every branch and needle, glittering like diamonds in the pale sun, a silent testament to a power that could command a blizzard in an instant. Not 50 paces further down the path, a wide swath of the mountainside was scorched black. The very rocks cracked and melted from a heat far more intense than any normal fire. Duality, Ingvar observed, his analytical mind processing the scene. A perfect opposition of forces. To wield both would require a tremendous amount of control, or a complete lack of it. A schism in the soul, perhaps. As they rounded a sharp bend, they saw him. He was standing on a high, flat ledge of rock overlooking the pass, a lone figure against the vast, gray sky. He was young, perhaps Isa's age, with a lean, athletic build. But what immediately drew the eye was his hair, parted perfectly down the middle, one side a stark, snowy white, the other a deep, fiery crimson, and his face, the left side was pale and aristocratic, with a calm, cold gray eye. The right side was marred by a puckered, angry burn scar that pulled at the corner of a piercing turquoise eye. He was a living embodiment of the contradiction they had witnessed in the landscape. This was Snare Halfbran. The half-burnt. He wore simple, practical clothes, but he moved with a dangerous grace. The moment he saw them, his entire posture shifted, becoming coiled and hostile. "Turn back," he called out, his voice a low, steady monotone that held no warmth, only a chilling finality. "This is the last warning you will receive." Isa held up a hand in a gesture of peace. "We're not here to fight. My name is Izu. We just want to talk to you." Snare's expression didn't change. The scarred side of his face seemed to tighten. "I have nothing to say." He raised his right hand, palm open. With no warning, a torrent of brilliant orange flame erupted from it, a roaring jet of fire that shot across the pass and slammed into the cliff face just ahead of them. The rock exploded, sending a shower of superheated shrapnel raining down. The sheer concussive force of the blast knocked them back a step. "Your next warning will not be a warning," Snare stated, his voice still unnervingly calm. Ingvar immediately shifted into a defensive stance, his body thrumming with contained speed. Ochaka raised her shield, her face grim. But Isa stepped forward past them, his hands still raised. "Please!" he shouted over the howling wind. "We don't want your territory. We don't want the Jarl's silver. We just want to understand." "You understand nothing." Snare's voice finally cracked, a fissure of raw emotion breaking through the icy calm. The temperature around him seemed to plummet. A wave of frost spread from his left foot, coating the rock in a slick, glittering sheet of ice. He stomped his foot, and a series of jagged ice spikes, each as long as a man's arm, erupted from the ground, racing toward them. Ingvar moved. He was a blur, grabbing Izu and Ochaka and pulling them back just as the spikes ripped through the space where they had been standing. The sound of stone being torn asunder echoed in the pass. "His combat style is volatile and highly aggressive," Ingvar yelled, his tactical mind overriding any sense of fear. "He switches between elemental forms with no discernible pattern. Izu, a strategic withdrawal is the most logical course of action." But Isa wasn't listening. He was watching Snare, and he wasn't seeing a demon. He was seeing a cornered animal. He saw the pain in the boy's mismatched eyes, the desperate loneliness in his posture. He saw a boy lashing out at a world that had clearly hurt him, a world that had branded him with fire and left him to freeze in isolation. "I'm not leaving him," Isa said, his voice quiet but firm. He looked at his companions. "Keep him busy. Distract him. But do not hurt him. I need to get closer." Ochaka and Ingvar exchanged a look. It was a mad plan, but they trusted him. They trusted his heart. "Understood," Ingvar said, a grim line on his lips. Ochaka simply nodded, her shield held ready. The battle began. It was not a fight to win, but a dance of survival. Ingvar became a phantom, a blue and silver streak that zipped across the battlefield, his speed a constant harassment. He would appear at Snare's flank, forcing the boy to erect a wall of ice to defend himself, only to vanish and reappear on the other side, drawing a gout of flame. He never attacked, only evaded, his movements a perfect, calculated distraction. Ochaka was their anchor. She used her featherfall blessing on a large, flat slab of rock, turning it into a mobile shield. She would dart forward, the massive stone held before her as if it weighed nothing, intercepting blasts of fire and volleys of ice shards that would have otherwise overwhelmed Ingvar. She was a bulwark of steadfast defense, her presence on the field a constant, reassuring reality. This gave Iser the opening he needed. While Snare's attention was divided, Iser began his advance. He didn't charge. He moved slowly, deliberately, across the treacherous, element-scarred ground. The runes on his arms began to glow with a soft, steady green light. He drew on Thor's Megan, not for strength to strike, but for resilience to endure. A wave of intense heat washed over him as Snare, infuriated by his persistence, unleashed a sheet of flame in his direction. Iser raised his arms, crossing them before his face. The fire hit him, engulfing him in a roaring inferno. His clothes were singed, his skin seared, but the divine power within him acted as a buffer, a shield of pure vitality that prevented the flames from consuming him. He pushed through the fire, emerging from the other side, his eyes fixed on Snare. Snare stared, his turquoise eye wide with disbelief. He had just hit the boy with enough fire to melt steel, and he was still coming. A flicker of panic entered his expression. He switched tactics, stamping his left foot. The ground at Iser's feet erupted, a prison of thick ice walls shooting up around him, trapping him. Inside the icy cage, Iser took a deep breath. He didn't punch the wall. He simply placed his palms against the smooth, cold surface. He channeled his strength, not in a sudden burst, but a steady, inexorable pressure. Cracks began to spiderweb across the ice. The entire structure groaned, then shattered outward in a glittering explosion. Iser continued his advance, step by painful step. He endured a barrage of fiery projectiles and a blizzard of razor-sharp ice shards. He was battered, bruised, and burned, but he never faltered. He was a living representation of unstoppable will, a slow, green tide that would not be turned back. "Why won't you fight back?" Snare screamed, his control finally shattering completely. His fire and ice began to rage out of control, lashing out wildly, scorching the sky and freezing the air. "Fight me! Try to kill me like all the rest. Prove that you're just like him." Iser was close now, only a few yards away. He could see the tears welling in Snare's eyes, one freezing on his pale cheek, the other sizzling into steam against the scarred one. He could feel the maelstrom of pain and rage pouring off the boy in waves. "I'm not like him," Iser said, his voice raw but clear over the elemental chaos. "I don't know who he is. But I'm not him. And I'm not going to fight you." He took the final few steps, closing the distance between them until he was standing directly in front of the distraught boy. Snare's power raged around him, a tempest of fire and ice, but none of it touched Iser. It was as if he were standing in the eye of a hurricane. "Look at you," Iser said, his voice soft, panting from the exertion. He gestured to Snare's body, to the opposing forces at war within him. "This power, he gave it to you, didn't he? The fire, the man who hurt you. The one who gave you that scar." Snare flinched as if struck. The roaring flames around him guttered and died. The howling blizzard fell silent. He stared at Iser, his breath catching in his throat. Iser's gaze was filled not with pity, but with a profound, soul-deep understanding. He knew what it was to feel weak, to crave power, to be at the mercy of forces greater than himself. He saw the truth of Snare's life in the scarred landscape of his face. He wanted a weapon. Iser continued, his voice resonating with a certainty that came from Odin's insight, a flash of another's pain. "An heir. Someone who could wield his fire. But your mother, she gave you the ice, didn't she? A part of you that he could never control. A part of you that fought back." A single, perfect tear traced a path through the soot on Iser's cheek. "He hurt you. And he taught you that power is a tool for hurting others. That's all you've ever known. So you ran. You came up here to be alone, to keep everyone away, so you couldn't hurt anyone else, and no one could hurt you again." Snare was trembling, his whole body shaking with the force of his suppressed grief. The story of his life, laid bare by a stranger in a desolate mountain pass. His father, the powerful Jarl Indrever, obsessed with creating a successor who could surpass any legend. His brutal, unforgiving training. The accident with the kettle of boiling water, a moment of defiance that had earned him his scar and his mother's banishment. The constant, crushing pressure to be only his father's son, to suppress the gentle, quiet power of his mother's lineage. Aizu reached out, his hand moving slowly, giving Snare every chance to pull away. He didn't. Aizu gently placed his hand on the scarred side of Snare's face. It was not a gesture of aggression or dominance. It was a gesture of connection. He was wrong, Aizu said, his voice thick with emotion. He looked Snare directly in the eyes, his own green eyes blazing with a fierce, unwavering conviction. He poured all of his own experience, the pain of being Deku, the terror of the raid, the burden of his blessing, into his next words, forging them into a weapon that could shatter chains, not bodies. It is your power, Aizu declared, his voice ringing with the authority of Tyr's will. Not his. Not your mother's. Yours. The fire and the ice, they belong to you. You get to choose what you do with it. You can use it to build walls, or you can use it to protect people. You can be a demon, or you can be a hero. It is your choice. The words struck Snare with the force of a physical blow. He staggered back, pulling away from Aizu's touch. He looked at his hands, his right, wreathed in a gentle, flickering flame, his left, covered in a delicate filigree of frost. For his entire life they had been a curse, a symbol of his father's ambition and his own internal conflict. But now, for the first time, he saw them as something else. He saw them as his own. The last of his defenses crumbled. A choked, ragged sob tore from his throat, the first he had allowed himself in years. He sank to his knees on the cold stone, his head bowed, the prince of fire and ice finally broken, not by force, but by a simple, profound act of kindness. Aizu, exhausted and aching, knelt in front of him. Ochaka and Ingvar approached slowly, their weapons lowered, their faces a mixture of relief and awe. They kept a respectful distance, allowing the two boys their moment. They stayed on that mountain ledge for a long time as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the valley. Snare, his voice halting at first, then flowing in a torrent, told them everything. He spoke of his father, of a childhood without warmth, of a power that felt more like a cage than a gift. Aizu listened, not as a jarl or a leader, but as a friend, offering the simple, powerful medicine of being heard. When the last of the story was told, a fragile peace had settled over the half-burnt prince. The wild, chaotic energy was gone, replaced by a quiet, exhausted stillness. He looked at Aizu, at the boy who had walked through fire and ice for him, who had seen the person behind the monster. What now? Snare asked, his voice barely a whisper. Now you choose, Aizu said simply. You can stay here, if that's what you want. Or you can come with us. We're trying to build something. A place where power is used to protect, not to hurt. We could use someone like you. He wasn't offering a position in a war band. He was offering a family. Snare didn't answer immediately. He looked at his hands again, then out at the vast, empty world below. For the first time, it didn't look like a threat. It looked like a possibility. He rose to his feet, his movements slow but steady. He looked at the trio, the kind-hearted shield maiden, the rigid, honorable warrior, and the small boy with the heart of a giant. They were a collection of outcasts, misfits bound together by a shared purpose. He was an outcast. He was a misfit. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. He wouldn't swear an oath, not yet. His trust was a fragile, frozen thing that would take time to thaw. But he would travel with them. He would walk at their side, a silent and wary ally, stepping out of his self-imposed prison of fire and ice and taking the first tentative step toward a new path. As the four of them descended the mountain, leaving the scorched and frozen pass behind them, the sun finally dipped below the horizon. They were no longer a trio. The shield, the spear, and the mind had been joined by something new, something volatile and powerful. They had been joined by the storm, and none of them could possibly imagine how desperately they would need that storm in the days to come.